Welcome everyone, StealthyShiroean here, and today I'm bringing you my review of the Humble Choice Bundle for August 2023. Thankfully, my schedule is back on track and I can get this out to you guys a lot sooner. As always, there are some decent choices this month, but some that are a bit niche for the average player. Let me know what you think of this month's bundle as well in the comments below. Be sure to check the timestamps for specific games and stay tuned for my final thoughts in the end. Okay, let's get to the review. Starting us off this month is Hot Brass, which is a top-down tactical cop game. Players take the role of a SWAT operator and have to go into high-risk missions to take down criminals. But of course, as a cop, you're not supposed to go in guns blazing, shooting everyone dead. Even if you continually fail the mission and really wish you could do that. Although, this game does a good job to make sure that the other options not only are necessary to get the best ratings, but are also formidable in their own right. Shooting isn't the only option, and a lot of the time isn't the best one. Instead, players have other various gadgets like flashbangs, breaching explosives, and an under-the-door camera to get the job done. And sometimes simply shouting at people can get them to stand down. Using these can usually convince a criminal that death isn't a great option. But occasionally, you probably will have to shoot someone, but it really is a last resort thing. I found that out the hard way when I shot a criminal who had a gun, only to fail the mission because I didn't give him enough time to give up. This game reminded me a lot of police stories that we received last year in March 2022. I was about as good as that game as I was Hot Brass, and by that I mean I wasn't really that good at all. It does require some thinking on how you take down the criminals. I liked it, but I'm not sure I would come back to this by myself. Luckily, Hot Brass offers up to 4-player co-op, which I think would be a lot of crazy fun. In our incredibly niche game department, we have Tin Can. Tin Can forces the players to answer an age-old question that I'm sure is on everyone's mind. What would you do if you were in space, on an escape pod, and everything about the escape pod was falling apart? Basically, that's the game. You take the role of a member of a spaceship narrowly escaping the catastrophic explosion by entering this escape pod. But as stated, you're not out of the fire yet, because you chose the escape pod from hell to jettison off it. There are several components in the escape pod that must be maintained or gutted in order to keep more important systems online. The tutorial did an alright job going over some of this, but it's a lot to take in all at once. And there's good news and bad news for that. The good news is you're provided with a trusty manual to give you insight on different components, and more importantly, what all these different error codes mean. However, the bad news is that the lights might be out, so you can't read the book. Sure, you have a flashlight, but it's shoddy as heck. Not to mention, I felt on higher levels, speed became imperative, because if you can't figure something out fast enough, then you're dead. I'm not really sure how I feel about this game. At first, it didn't feel like it would be something for me at all, and I still think that's the case. Then again, this game did a lot to fill me with dread as I scrambled around my little pod to find out where things had problems, consulting my manual, and exchanging faulty parts. If the concept interests you, then give it a try. If not, then this one can be easily passed. Next up is SuchArt, a genius artist simulator. This game is set in the distant future where human artists are a rarity. As one of the few, you're tasked with running your own studio and using a variety of tools and equipment to spurn out masterpiece after masterpiece. There seems to be such a high attention to detail with all the different tools available to you. Different sized canvases, different brushes, ways to make different colors, and I guess later on in the game, you have the ability for sculpting and other large projects not necessarily canvas bound. It's an artist's dream, and it's entirely not for me. I'm no artist by any stretch of the imagination, and this game I found to be more frustrating than fun, just because of my lack of ability. I do want to learn how to create art in the future, but I haven't found the time yet to dedicate to that skill. This game is just a reminder of how much I suck. I realize that the point of the game is to experiment with different things and just create whatever you'd like. Indeed, the art commissions that people ask for don't really matter at all. I was putting anything on the canvas and people were pleased with it. So you could, in theory, paint whatever pops into your head. That said, whatever I think of in my head is never what I could put on the paper. Or screen in this case. Maybe I'll return to this one day, but I definitely only see art enthusiasts latching onto this one. You'd be forgiven for thinking that you may actually be playing Laundromat Simulator rather than Arcade Paradise, a game about making your own arcade. At least, if the first hour or so is any judge. But there are arcade machines here. The story follows a young man whose father can't take him seriously. To give his son some sense of responsibility, he has his son run one of the laundromats that he owns. Very quickly, the son, aka the player, realizes that the arcade cabinets make a lot more money than the washing machines do, and wants to pivot the business. But these things start small, and you're not going to convince your dad overnight. In the beginning, I found myself taking care of people's laundry, cleaning up the place, and occasionally sneaking in a game or two on the cabinets. To be honest, I'm not sure if I was playing the game the right way. I strived for efficiency and earning the most amount of money over leisure, so I didn't really play the arcade games that much. However, there is a wide selection, and apparently up to 35 different cabinets from what their Steam page says, and some more if you're willing to pay for the DLC. I think that's pretty cool that there's so many different games within a game, and I kinda like the simulator nature of it. Then again, I've been finding these almost monotonous tasks that simulator games have weirdly enjoyable. I definitely want to return to this one, especially so that I could see all the different arcade machines that they have. Next up is Trek to Yomi, which is an action-adventure game set in Edo period Japan, where you take on the role of Hiroki, a samurai sworn to uphold his sensei's teaching and his honor through the defense of others. Players will do this by hacking and slashing their way through the baddies, while doing some light exploration through each level. Obviously, the first thing anyone will notice is the stunning presentation of Trek to Yomi. Visually, it's a masterpiece and has a cinematic quality to the game inspired by old Kurosawa films. And while I really like this look, it also comes with some problems. Things didn't seem as well telegraphed to the player as far as what they could interact with and where the player could go. There were several times where I was just running into a wall because I didn't realize where I should be going. Also, I think it was a mistake to make the subtitles white when much of the background can also be white, making it hard to read. Combat-wise, I think it's okay. There feels like a lot of hacking and slashing with some light stamina management. Some fights did seem unfair though. For instance, in this fight, I felt if you couldn't get in good attacks from the get-go, then you were trapped with him constantly whittling your stamina. That said, this could be purely my own inexperience with the game. Personally, Trek to Yomi intrigued me enough to want to keep playing in the future. Road 96 is a really interesting narrative adventure game. The premise is you are a teenager trying to flee the fictional country of Petria. Apparently, there are some really bad problems in the country, especially for teenagers, that have many trying to escape. All this is told through a road trip trying to reach the border and meeting eccentric characters along the way. However, whether you reach the border, or end up dead, as was the case with my run, that's not the end. The game is meant to be played through multiple times because each road is different. The developers advertise it as a procedurally generated road trip with a ton of possibilities. I'm fairly sure there would be a lot of repeat scenes, but it is an interesting premise. Many of the characters I came across gave me a percentage after talking with them that presumably was how much I saw of their story. It really gave me incentive to want to play it again so that I could learn everything there was about each of the different characters. The presentation was very good. I liked the aesthetic they chose for the game, and the voice acting was decent. Although I have to say they were top-notch in their music department. I'm definitely looking forward to continuing this one in the near future. The next game, Chivalry 2, has been something I've been waiting to play for a long time now. I played Chivalry 1 a ton back in my college days with a buddy and my girlfriend, now wife. This was a great nostalgia trip for me, and I'm really happy to finally get my hands on it. For those who don't know, Chivalry 2 is a multiplayer medieval combat game that's easy to pick up, but pretty hard to master. Like, really hard. I'm not good at all, but put a decent amount of time into Chivalry 1. Chivalry 2 immediately starts player off in a tutorial and does a good job explaining how the controls work, comboing, how and when to block, etc. However, it's obviously one thing to learn these in a tutorial versus putting them into practice when you're in a multiplayer match. Trying to remember all the different ways to counter an attack, parry, and the likes all escape my brain minutes into a match. The routine of spawn in, find an enemy, and immediately die became really familiar. But it's still a heck of a lot of fun. As I was regaining my chivalry legs, so to speak, I began learning a bit more when to back off and take the attacks when I could, It's definitely a learning process for the fighting mechanics as well as the maps. Also, there's 4 different classes that each have their own special things about them, as well as a ton of cosmetic changes players can strive to unlock. Another thing I was happy to see, although unable to try in my hour, was that mounted combat is now a thing. That was something many wanted to see in the first game, and now here it is. I definitely can't wait to continue playing this game. Oh yeah, and one last thing. For the blue and gold! The heavily praised Disco Elysium makes its way as the headliner for the month. It's a narrative-focused CRPG that places a lot of emphasis on the role-playing aspect. Characters take the role of a detective and are thrown into a world where they know nothing about themselves or their surroundings, and neither does the main character since they drank themselves into oblivion the night before. Despite the praise, awards, and everyone basically talking about this game, I always felt that it wasn't really something for me. The art didn't do too well to attract me, and I didn't really care for the style of writing, from what little I had been exposed to. It seemed silly to me. That said, I try to keep an open mind when finally playing this game, and I'm actually pretty happy with it. The writing seems to lean closer to a dark comedy than anything else because many of the dialogue options seemed really ridiculous. But at the same time, it gave me several literal laugh-out-loud moments. I think the world is a bit confusing, but that could be said for almost any fictional world that you step into for the first time. I'm sure things will make a lot more sense after more exposure, and this is probably something that could be played a second time to get a different perspective from the different chosen focuses. I would definitely try this out if you're into CRPGs and were on the fence about it for so long like myself. Okay, let's wrap this up and see if this bundle is worth it or not. I based my rating solely on whether I thought the game was worth playing on about an hour or so of hands-on gameplay. Also, I'd be grateful if you could please give this video a like if you're enjoying it, because that really helps me out with the YouTube algorithm gods. Overall, this month was another pretty decent month. I'd say it's weaker than the last couple of months, at least from how I remember them without consulting what I actually said about them, but I definitely felt there were just a couple niche games that would only find love within certain audiences, and I wasn't that audience. And Disco Elysium, while certainly a strong contender, I wouldn't say it's a bundle seller only since probably most people who wanted to play this already have by this point. Maybe I'm wrong about that? But all that said, there were no real stinkers this month, and I enjoyed most of what was on offer. Also, I wanted to raise awareness of an announcement I recently made on my game dev channel talking about the Siege of Jeomdo. Basically, it's a game I've been helping to make with Studio Hipsword. Link in the description as well as a card if you'd like to watch it and learn a bit more. Now let's get on with the recommendations, starting as always with the must-plays of the month. And you probably already know what I'm going to say, but hands down it's Chivalry 2. This is such a nostalgia trip for me to return to the franchise that I have a lot of fond memories of. And it's been improved in a lot of ways to basically just be more of what made the original so great. Following that up are strong recommendations, which are Disco Elysium, Road 96, and Trek to Yomi. While I don't feel Disco Elysium lives up to all the hype and laudations it received, at least not yet, I definitely can't say it's a bad CRPG. It did enough to impress me and get me to laugh, which I feel usually doesn't happen with video games. Road 96 comes in as another strong narrative game for the bundle, and I think its use of so-called procedurally generated narrative sounds rather interesting. Finally, Trek of Yomi finds its way up here solely on the presentation alone. It really is a masterclass in that regard, even if many reviewers have said the combat gets stale really fast. In the week recommendations I placed Hot Brass, Arcade Paradise, and SuchArt, a Genius Artist Simulator. Hot Brass was a fun top-down tactical cop game that was also kind of frustrating. I'm unsure if I'd stick with a game like that for the long haul, but with a friend and multiplayer, this would make this way more enjoyable. Arcade Paradise has a fantastic premise of building the ideal arcade spot, but I have a feeling the slow start might be a turnoff for a lot of people. Finally, SuchArt is technically a game I wouldn't bother with again myself, but it did a lot of things right that I think many people much more artistically creative than me would really appreciate. I may not play it, but I know I would definitely recommend it. Finally, in the Don't Bother With section is Tin Can. Tin Can builds a game around the very niche idea of surviving in space in a failing escape pod. It's a unique idea, and it brought with it some hair-raising moments. but ultimately I felt this might be a bit too technical for me to really enjoy. While this might be something I could recommend to someone who is interested in something like this, I feel that crowd would be a lot smaller than the one for SuchArt, hence why it gets placed in this section. And that wraps up my thoughts on this month's bundle. A nice assortment of games, but Chivalry 2 really makes it for me. Do you agree with my thoughts? What games, if any, are you looking forward to playing? Let me know what your thoughts are, or if there are any different recommendations you make in the comments below. I hope this video helped you out in some small way, and then if it did, please consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, whatever it is you feel like doing. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day.